Hi everyone, this is Dr. Mike, host of the free iTunes podcast, Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike, but that's not why I'm here today. This is another Saving Savvy episode, and this time I'm going to try to answer the question, how are little digicams getting better and better at making images? Well, as you know, there's a lot of competition from cell phones, and just to stay in the game, digicams have had to do some re-engineering so people are willing to spend the extra money on a little point-and-shoot camera when they already have a camera on their cell phone. So when you look at improving, and I'm using my poor man's PowerPoint again, and unfortunately when I do this with the camera, everything is backwards, so I'm always pointing in the wrong spot, but I'm going to do the best I can. Of course, there's the operator, and by the operator, it's not just the ability to know how to shoot the picture. I'm also including a lot of the external controls. So you're going to see more controls on cameras, especially with compact cameras in the mid to the upper range than you used to see before. But there's also the hardware, and that's the unsung hero of this new improvement in these types of cameras. There's really three components to that hardware. So let's try to get this in there. And fairly simply, we have the lens component, the sensor component, which is like your digital film, and often what we don't think about, but it's very important, is the processor. The processor is just like the processor in your computer. It's the brains of the operation. So let's look at each of those separately. So first of all, you have the lens. Now, of course, all cameras have had lenses, but what you're starting to see now are lenses that are faster. And by faster, what I mean by that is that they're brighter. They let more light in, which means that they're going to work in more difficult conditions. So a lens that has the ability to let more light in is going to allow you to take indoor shots, for instance, without using a flash, or other types of shots that would just be impossible with your typical compact camera of even just a few years ago. The lenses are also better. So there's been good lens technology around for a long time, but what was happening in compact cameras is that you were using cheap components. So a lens is not just one piece of glass, it's usually a series of pieces of glass, kind of a lens system. And in a cheap camera, some of those might be made out of plastic, or they just might be inferior. In a better camera like a DSLR, you're going to be talking about very high-grade optical glass. You're going to be talking about coatings on the glass, especially shaped glass, to just give you the right types of performance. You're starting to see that technology now dribble down into the mid-range and more expensive compact cameras, really giving you excellent results. The other place where you're seeing improvement is in sensors. So the sensor is your digital film of your camera. So even if you look at the most basic sensors, they've improved just by engineering over the last few years so that they're better. But some of the tricks that some manufacturers are using is they're using slightly larger than typical sensors, still small sensors, but they're slightly larger. And the larger the sensor, the more surface area that you have to collect light. The more surface area that you have to collect light, the less noise you're going to have in your low light pictures, and the better the dynamic range you're going to have, which makes your pictures look realistic. So bigger sensors, and also better engineered sensors, and what's called backlit sensors. What that means is that some of the electronic circuitry that used to be sort of blocking the photo sites on old sensors has now been pushed to the back of the sensor, so there's more light gathering power for those photo sites, and they're just going to perform better. Some manufacturers are doing very creative things. They're actually changing the way that the pixels are placed on the sensor, which allows them in certain circumstances to actually combine pixels together. In other words, like taking maybe 2 pixel sites and creating a super pixel site that usually reduces your megapixel count, which isn't that important because there's plenty of megapixels, but it effectively makes your sensors more sensitive. So that's another little trick that they've done with sensors. Well, the unsung hero, of cameras has always been the processor. In other words, the little computer in your camera that is no different than the processor in your desktop or cell phone or anything else. So processors have gotten progressively faster. They're able to handle more operations every second or so. And what that allows you to do is write more complicated programs. And by doing that, you can do more sophisticated things. So for instance, you can now do things in processing like reduce noise selectively. So instead of just doing a global smear of everything, the processor can actually look at the data and say, oh, this area here is showing more noise than this area over here, so I'm going to reduce the noise more over here. So you get a better image. Or it might say, okay, I'm going to reduce the noise over here, but I'm going to make sure that areas of high contrast, in other words, like lines and things that gives the picture definition, are going to remain sharp. Another very sophisticated sort of option that these cameras can now do. Another thing that the cameras will do is they'll take a series of shots, 3 shots, 6 shots, whatever, of the same object. So let's say you take a series of 6 shots of this cup, and then the computer or the processor will look at the different shots and see if there's little specks that are different from shot to shot, which it's going to assume that's noise. So it's going to eliminate those spots while keeping the picture nice and sharp. Now obviously a technique like that works best with a static object like this cup as opposed to something that's moving around, because that's a little bit too complicated for the processor. The other thing that you can do is that processors are so sophisticated they can simulate things. So they can do things like simulate an HDR or high dynamic range type picture, overall just giving you a better shot. So when you combine that trinity of things, better quality and faster lenses, a better processor, which is much more sophisticated, and a better sensor, what you're able to do is really produce very high quality pictures from fairly simple point and shoot cameras. Now, will these pictures be as good as a DSLR? No, but what you really are seeing more and more now is that there is less difference. So in the old days, they used to say a medium format was the absolute best and nothing could compete with it. Well, now you're starting to see some full frame, which is much smaller, sensors being almost as good as that medium format. And you're starting to see some APS-C size sensors, which are the size that you typically find in DSLRs. Well, they're starting to look almost as good as some of those full frame sensors. And then you're seeing some micro four thirds sensors, which is below an APS-C sensor. These are starting to look as good as some APS-C sensors, and so on. So the technology is dropping down and down and down and down and down, and it's drifting into the simple compact camera, producing cameras that are just amazing in their capabilities and ever performing better. So I hope that explanation kind of gives you some idea how and why cameras are getting better all the time, and how that simple point and shoot is becoming more and more sophisticated and more DSLR-like. Thanks for watching, and give my podcast a listen. It's free and it's on iTunes. Take care.